Time to pull up a chair. We've got another great story for you today in the R Lounge. When this mother-in-law said she wanted to be close to the grandkids, we didn't realize she meant through a CPS investigation and a mental institution visit. Today in the R Lounge, somebody put this grandma on a timeout. Obsessed mother-in-law wanted the custody of my daughter, reported me to CPS. We cut her off from our life. I, 39 female, am facing a weird kind of mother-in-law problem. I know you guys would have read the extreme mother-in-law issues, but here's mine. My husband, 39 male, is an adopted child of my in-laws. Due to some medical conditions, my mother-in-law could not conceive. After trying for more than a decade, they adopted my husband. However, my mother-in-law was not satisfied with the one kid, rather the one boy. She wanted a baby girl, but they got no luck in adopting a girl. I don't know the complete details, but my husband said there were many reasons like financial situations and laws around the adoption of a girl as a second child. The main thing is she didn't get to raise a baby girl, and now she's trying to sabotage my relationship with my daughter. I have been married to my husband for 7 years. We have a 4-year-old son, and recently I delivered a daughter. She is 4 months. Ever since she was born, mother-in-law has been love-bombing her. Prior to my son, I had a decent relationship with my in-laws, neither too close nor too distant. We catch up once in a while. After my son was born, the meetings increased. They adored my son. We had dinners together once or twice a month. They gladly babysat my son. He also loved spending time with his grandparents. Everything was normal until she got to know that my second child is going to be a girl. She was in happy tears, hugging and kissing my forehead. I felt loved. I understand some people have a preference towards a certain gender, especially for girls. She took care of me for my remaining days of pregnancy. She would bring me flowers, juices, chocolates, and everything I craved for. I was truly pampered by her. Honestly, I didn't feel it weird because she was not very unusual in her character. In general, she has been kind and generous. Her obsession started to show up when she demanded to be in the labor room with me. She wanted to be the first person to see the baby. My husband denied her request and said this right was reserved for him. She was disheartened. She tried to involve father-in-law in this. Father-in-law adores his wife. I mean, it's a good thing. They are school sweethearts, and their marriage has sustained for over 5 decades. They say their love peaked because of the infertility trauma they have faced together. They say mother-in-law was distraught when she got to know that she could not be a birth giver. She even slipped into depression. Father-in-law stepped up as a good husband and did everything he could to keep his wife happy. Since then, there's no looking back for him. He still loves her like a teenage boy. That dude is a keeper. So for father-in-law, anything his wife demands has to be fulfilled. He asked my husband to let her accompany me to the delivery room, but my husband didn't drop his guns. Luckily, she understood her boundaries and backed off, or else my father-in-law would have gone to any lengths to fulfill her demands. However, she accompanied us to the hospital and stayed there until I was discharged. My husband asked her to go home because we had left our son at their house, but she said father-in-law could take care of him. I didn't mind her presence a lot because she was helpful. She gave a hand in swaddling the baby on the first night because I was too exhausted, and my husband was also tired. You know how men behave after coming out of the delivery room, huh? So it was all fine until then. We got back home and she came along. She helped us get the baby settled in the nursery. Then she asked if she could stay a bit longer to lend a hand. I said sure. It meant we could have our son back with us. We had sent him to our grandparents because managing both kids at once was a bit too much. So having her offer to stay and help was a relief. She ended up staying over a week. And you know how those first few days with a newborn fly by, right? Father-in-law came to take her home. She had her bags packed, but she was in tears because she'd missed the baby. I figured it was normal to feel that way after spending a week with a newborn. I thanked her for all the support. She assured us she could come over any time we needed her. I told her I will, but I never got the opportunity to call her for help because she was here even before the call. She'd come by 2 or 3 times a week, bringing all sorts of things for my daughter. We were thankful at first, but now it's starting to feel overwhelming. After about a month, we gently suggested that we were settling into a routine with the baby and might not need as much help. We assured her that we would reach out if we needed anything, but she continues to visit us regularly. The frustrating part is that she keeps bringing unnecessary items for the baby. I'm not a fan of the clothes she's choosing. They often have cringy phrases like grandma's little girl or grandma's princess. While I know some people like that style, it's just not my taste. I have my own preferences for dressing my daughter, but mother-in-law has already stocked up on everything. It feels wrong to spend money on clothes that we already have, so I end up using her stuff. But it doesn't bring me the same joy. I don't know how well I'm able to express my feelings. Maybe I'm in an a-hole, but I'm not liking her involvement in my daughter's life. I haven't discussed this with my husband yet. I don't know if my feelings are even valid. I don't want to come across as a mean and ungrateful daughter-in-law, especially considering how much his mother has helped us. Posting it here so that I can get some perspective. Well, it sounds like your mother-in-law is taking her role as a grandmother to a whole new level, kind of like a helicopter mom, but for her grandkid. Instead of hovering over her own children, she's hovering over yours. And those clothes. It's like she's trying to brand her daughter with property of grandma. I mean, the kid's not a walking billboard, right? You have every right to feel like you're losing control over how you want to raise and enjoy your daughter. In all seriousness, it sounds like a heart-to-heart with your husband is in order. You're not an a-hole for wanting some boundaries. It's great that she loves your daughter, but there's a fine line between being a loving grandma and a grandparental takeover. Time to reclaim your space before your living room starts to look like a tribute to grandma's little girl memorabilia. Update 1. Thanks for validating my feelings. Some of you suggested I have an open discussion with my husband about this, so I did. I told my husband that I didn't like the stuff mother-in-law brings for my baby. He said it's a very genuine feeling and maybe I should convey this to mother-in-law directly instead of him getting involved. It might hurt her that we are talking about this behind her back. Makes sense. The next time mother-in-law came over, she brought a tiara for my daughter. I sat her down and expressed my concerns gently. She seemed upset, but I didn't apologize because I felt it was important to set boundaries. I let her suck it up. She didn't visit for a whole week after that incident. That was the longest she had been away after the baby has arrived. My husband asked if I had been rude to her, and I admitted that while I hadn't been rude, I had been firm in my words. I thought she was unwell. I called her to check. She said she was under the weather, hence she was maintaining a distance from the baby. Didn't want to pass the virus to the baby. She came 2 or 3 days later and played with my daughter as she always did. I thought maybe the issue had resolved itself. God, no. She pulled something else from her sleeves. I don't know if her actions were deliberate or if she was genuinely unaware of how she was behaving. After that day, she continued to visit every second day and sometimes daily to spend time with my daughter. Mind you, she lives an hour away, yet she drives every day back and forth. I observed that now she spent more time by my child's nursery. She doesn't speak to me as she used to earlier. Just normal greetings. Earlier, we shared a fairly good bond. Now, she's gotten cold towards me. My concern is not her coldness, but her behavior towards my daughter. She spends at least 4 to 5 hours in my house. Whenever my daughter cries, she runs to pick her up. Even when I'm right by the crib, attempting to calm her without lifting her, she intervenes and swaddles her to sleep. I tell her not to disrupt my daughter's sleep routine. She's now 5 months old and I'm working hard to establish a routine for her. But if this woman continues to abruptly put her to sleep, my daughter would never follow the routine. To her defense, she says, "For God's sakes, Martha, she's not a baby and not a prisoner that needs to follow a regimen." A few weeks back, I was in the kitchen when I heard my baby crying. I washed my hands and went to pick her up. Mother-in-law was napping, but somehow she heard the cries. She ran towards my baby's room, almost pushing me aside with her elbow on the stairs to reach the baby first. She picked up the baby and soothed while I stood there amazed at her actions. I felt it was some kind of competition as to who picked up the baby first. When my son was born, I implemented the self-soothing technique when he was 3 months old, allowing him to calm himself under my supervision. I didn't rush to pick him up at the first cry. It worked and he turned out to be a happy baby who didn't demand to be held. However, I haven't been able to apply the same method with my daughter. On the days when my mother-in-law isn't around, I practice it, but as soon as she returns, she swoops in and holds the baby, and all my efforts in the last day go for a loss. I told my friend about this, and she said I'm lucky that my mother-in-law is being so helpful. The thing is, I do appreciate her help, but she's overdoing her bit now. I can't say this to anyone without being judged, but the truth is, I hate it when she picks up my baby in front of me and cuddles her to sleep. I hate it when she says, "Don't worry, Grandma has your back. Grandma is always going to love you. You're our grandma's girl. You are my golden girl." Even if I keep my feelings aside and try to understand her, I fail to. She's grandma and not mother. Besides that, she's creating a very unhealthy environment for my children. Though my son is 4.5 now, he is still a child. He is so tiny, yet he understands that grandma loves his sister more than him. I'm afraid this kind of bias may prevail in hatred between the siblings. I assure him that we love both of them equally, but he has valid points to counter. He says grandma doesn't bring anything for him. For the entire time she is here, she plays with the baby and doesn't even talk to him. The other day, he asked his grandma to take him for a walk, but she refused. She said the baby needed her. When my son said the baby was asleep, she snapped at him. What if the baby wakes up and cries and not seeing her grandma? I said I was here for the baby if she woke up. She rolled her eyes and took a nap beside the baby's crib. Her obsession with my daughter is increasing, and I'm afraid it will become a mental health issue for her. I hate to think this, but my gut feeling says she sees my daughter as a way to fulfill her maternal desires she has had for her own child. I don't consider this to be a healthy sign. I mean, she is a grandma and not a mother. We need to have well-defined roles for her. Any advice on how to approach this issue? Wow, your mother-in-law really seems to be on a mission to become the world's most overbearing grandmother. You tried to set boundaries, but she saw that as a mere suggestion rather than a rule. And now it looks like she's decided to up her game by turning your home into her personal second nursery. The whole tiara situation is a real gem. You sat her down to talk, and she took a whole week to cool off. A luxury vacation for you, I'm sure. But then she came back with a vengeance, bringing her A-game to the crib side. Now it sounds like she's operating under some bizarre first responder code, where the first of the crying baby gets to soothe it. Her comment about your baby not being a prisoner was a real classic. Maybe she thinks your parenting style belongs in some Victorian-era novel, but you've got her modern approach, and she's still stuck in a fantasy where she's the queen of the castle and your daughter is her little princess, with you, the lowly peasant, just trying to keep up. It's clear your mother-in-law is on a mission, but it's one that's more about filling her own emotional void than actually helping you or respecting your parenting style. You gotta set some clear boundaries now, or else. Update 2. Hello all. Sorry for not updating sooner. What can I say? Things have taken a weird turn. As I mentioned earlier, mother-in-law was obsessed with my daughter and I dreaded it was not normal, and yes, I was right. Until 6 months, I was breastfeeding my baby, so there was nothing she could do. I bet if she had that ability, she would have opted to feed her. Anyway, as my baby crossed her milestone, I slowly introduced semi-solids to her, and my God, my mother-in-law jumped to feed her from her own hands. She brought a variety of baby foods for her. I told her I was introducing one at a time so that I knew which food she was allergic to. Once, my baby was crying profusely. Her food was ready, but before I could feed her, my son hurt himself and his knees were bleeding. I was cleaning him up when my mother-in-law came and offered a hand to feed the baby. You understand your brain stops functioning when both of your children are howling at the same time. So without thinking about the consequences, I accepted her help to feed the baby. I was shocked at how she was behaving. More than shocked, I was scared. She was humming to her as how she has waited for so many years to experience this moment, and it feels so magical to her. Trust me, it gave me goosebumps. That night, when my husband came, I told him that his mother needed to be examined because I didn't see her mentally fit. She could be harmful around the kids. He dismissed my concern, saying she was just being a loving grandma. I hated myself for not recording her in the act. 2 days later, she fed beans to my baby without my permission. My baby is allergic to beans. She developed rashes on her body. That was the last nail in the coffin. I told her she needed to be within her boundaries, not feed my daughter, not try to overshadow me, and be a grandma and not her mom. I strictly told her she should not do or give or bring anything to my baby without my permission. I also added, I appreciate all your help, but now you can sit back. I can handle my kids. I'll let you know if I need a hand, but until then, you should give us space. My husband tried to pitch in, but I gave him the look of, don't you dare, and he remained out of the conversation. She had teary eyes. She didn't say a word and walked out like a destitute. 3 to 4 days later, father-in-law called my husband and asked him what had happened between us that mother-in-law was crying herself to sleep. She was not eating properly. My husband told him everything. He was sad about my baby's rashes, but he was more disappointed that I made his dear wife upset. He said, what's the problem if her grandma wants to love her baby? I said the problem is grandma is trying to be a mother and she is not a mother. I didn't know the phone was on speaker. She began yelling from the other end, asking how I could say that she shouldn't try to act like a mother. My husband and I were confused because I am her mother. Duh. I had never seen that face of my mother-in-law. She screamed at me that I was a bad mother. I neglected my daughter. I let her cry and didn't pacify her. I keep her hungry and attend to my son. She threatened to take my daughter away from me. At this point, father-in-law hung up the call. Later that night, he called us and apologized. He admitted that indeed mother-in-law had gotten obsessed with the baby because she had never acted this way. Father-in-law told us that mother-in-law cried and confessed that she was jealous of me because I have a daughter and she doesn't. He took her to therapy to address her emotions, and dang, I was right. The therapist said that she was harboring maternal instincts for my daughter and considering herself to be her mother. I told my husband and father-in-law that I'm not comfortable letting mother-in-law come near my daughter, so they should keep her away. Father-in-law agreed to keep mother-in-law at a distance. I feel sorry for her, but there's really nothing I can do for her. I cannot give away my daughter to her. Phew, that woman has turned dangerous. That's all I have for now. Wow, it sounds like your mother-in-law took a detour from Grandma of the Year to Psycho Granny real quick. You were just trying to manage your household, and she was over there auditioning for the role of your daughter's mother. At this rate, the next thing you know, she'll be buying matching mother-daughter outfits and printing out adoption papers. I can imagine the scene when you finally put your foot down. And the part where she started humming about her magical moment feeding your daughter? It's straight out of a horror movie. You half expect the background music to switch to something ominous as the camera zooms in on her face. The beans incident was a disaster waiting to happen. Of course, she picked that one food your baby is allergic to. In the end, you've got to protect your kids, and if that means keeping mother-in-law at arm's length, so be it. You didn't sign up for a co-parenting arrangement with your husband's mom. She needs to get her own baby doll and practice her maternal instincts on that instead. Finally, we have cut off mother-in-law from our life. She has made my life miserable. After the last confrontation with her, father-in-law kept her away from us. He took her to therapy and vacations to distract her from this feeling. She acted normal. After 4 months of counseling, the therapist said she has recovered from that feeling and understands her role as a grandma. I got a call from father-in-law that mother-in-law wants to meet us and apologize. I said sure, but she's not allowed with my kids until I am satisfied with her behavior, and she would have to follow some ground rules during the meeting. Father-in-law agreed. I gave them the time for 8 p.m. My children sleep at 7. They came and she said she was sorry for her past behavior and promised to respect my boundaries. After the dinner, father-in-law and my husband were chatting regarding something while I was doing the dishes. It suddenly stuck in my mind as to where mother-in-law was. I rushed towards my children's rooms and found her climbing the stairs to their room. I ran and blocked her. I asked her where she was heading to. She said, "Now that everything is sorted, can I give a goodnight kiss to my grandkids?" I said, "Not now, and next time, better take my permission before heading towards my children's room." She nodded and came down. She tried to behave normally, but I could sense that she didn't like that I blocked her way. A week later, CPS officers came knocking at my door. They said my neighbor had told them that I was mistreating my children, especially my daughter. Son of a witch! I asked if that complaint was a woman. They said they couldn't reveal it to protect the identity of the complaint. They took my son aside for questioning him about our parenting. I called my husband and asked him to rush home. I tried to be calm because I knew nothing would come out of it. I didn't tell the authorities that it must have been my mother-in-law. I let my husband come and deal with it himself. My children were examined for any physical assault. My son was questioned since he was old enough to talk. It was all so messed up. My husband called father-in-law and told him about all this. He arrived along with mother-in-law. As soon as she arrived, she screamed at me, "Oh dear Lord, what did you do to my grandkids? Are they okay? Why are they with the cops?" Father-in-law shut her down and said they were not cops but a CPS team. She asked one of the officials, "If it is proven that she has been neglecting the children, do the grandparents get custody?" The officer said no. The process of claiming custody is different. She asked him to explain that. He rolled his eyes and went away. We insisted father-in-law disclose mother-in-law's obsession with the baby, and she might have made a hoax call. He resisted it because it might lead to mother-in-law getting institutionalized. He said it was in the past, and now mother-in-law doesn't harbor any of those feelings. I told my husband that if they are not disclosing it, then I'm going to do it for them because I'm done with this woman. I went straight to the officer and told them mother-in-law has been seeking therapy for her obsession with my daughter. She wants custody of my daughter, and that's why she is falsely framing me. Mother-in-law charged at me and said I was falsely accusing her without any evidence. I asked my husband to check her phone history. She resisted it, but my husband snatched her phone and saw she had called CPS a day ago. The call duration was over 10 minutes. God knows what details she had provided them. My husband shared the past incidents and her medical files with the officers. After a thorough investigation, we came off their hook. We were exhausted at the end of the investigation, even though we tried to be calm. But who can remain composed when they are on the verge of losing their children, even if minor misunderstandings come to light? The CPS team apologized for causing us inconvenience. However, this was a blessing in disguise because we have cut off mother-in-law from our children's lives, and she has been admitted to a mental care institute. Father-in-law insisted we let him meet the children. Initially, I disagreed. After a lot of requests from him and husband, I agreed to let him meet my children monthly, once at my house and under my supervision, and under no circumstances would mother-in-law be allowed to see my children, even if she comes clean from the mental care. I don't trust her at all. Wow, That really went from overbearing to outright unhinged. But the CPS stunt was truly her magnum opus. Imagine the audacity to try and use CPS as her personal revenge squad. She must have binge-watched too many courtroom dramas, thinking she could waltz in and become the hero grandma by tattling to the authorities. When CPS showed up, it must have felt like you were suddenly thrust into the Twilight Zone, having to prove you're a good parent because your mother-in-law decided to play a twisty game of, let's pretend there's child neglect. Is next level crazy. Her dramatic entrance with father-in-law, screaming about the kids and immediately grilling the officers about custody, was the cherry on top. In the end, you did the right thing by putting your foot down. It's like you finally took the nuclear option to protect your family. Mother-in-law is now in a mental care institute where she can't hatch any more diabolical plots. Father-in-law might be disappointed, but at least you've set firm boundaries. Letting father-in-law visit under your supervision is a fair compromise. Hopefully he's not secretly taking notes from mother-in-law on how to bypass your rules. Stay vigilant. What do you make of this? What would you have done? Thank you for joining us today in the R Lounge. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video. See you soon! And don't forget to put your chair back where you found it.